and this is week 5, video 2, on new directions in anthropology, specifically postmodernism. So let's review the sort of evolution of cultural anthropology that we've discussed over the course of the semester. And the big question is cultural anthropology really a social science, or is it in the humanities? So just a quick review, we talked about social evolution theory, which contemporary American anthropology sort of arose as a refutation of. And if you'll recall, social evolution, was the set of theories explaining cultural diversity in the world as an evolution of human societies from savagery to barbarism to civilization. Next, I told you about functionalism, and that theoretical framework posited that people themselves don't understand why they do the things they do. The things they do, the cultural things, are meant to function, to keep order within that society. But people are so inured to their own culture that they can't get that bigger picture and can't understand that larger function. So they need an anthropologist to come in and figure out what that function is for them. Okay, so both of these, social evolution and functionalism, have the anthropologist as the scientist, the ultimate decision maker and analyst, the one who categorizes, the one who figures out the function, working as objectively as possible in the field using all kinds of evidence to make these scientific determinations. And then we have a sea change in the 1960s or so, and we start to see, I'm getting out of my slides. So there you see a couple more things about functionalism. My apologies. Next, we get into interpretivism, which you may remember associated with Clifford Geertz, who really wrote a lot about how culture is more of an interpretation, like reading a book. And so culture is in the eye of the beholder, the anthropologist, but also in the eye of the people in that culture who are carrying out those cultural beliefs and practices. And that the best we can really do as anthropologists is interpret what we think is going on based on what the people themselves interpret their lives to be. So, as you can see, this moves anthropology much more into the humanities. It's more akin to literature and literary criticism or history than it is akin to sociology and economics and political science, and their still sort of insistence that they're objective, that they're somewhat scientific, that they're using these kind of objective models and data sets and so forth to explain human behavior. Of course, these aren't the only theoretical frameworks in cultural anthropology, but they sort of tell this story. And then soon after interpretivism, anthropology, like many other fields, entered into a love affair with postmodernism, which some people call POMO. And postmodernism in anthropology started asking very confusing questions, such as, what is culture anyway? And really started to promote the notion of the reflexivity about the role of the ethnographer. And reflexivity has to do with really looking at, looking at who the ethnographer is and understanding everything about a society through the lens of that ethnographer. But let's take a step back and talk about where postmodernism came from in the first place. So there are lots of people who spend their time as philosophers and historians talking about these vast periods of human history when certain things kind of gelled and coalesced. And so some of them have called much of the last few hundred years the modern period. And in particularly, I want to talk about the late modern period of the 19th and 20th centuries, where we began in this class with, the St. Louis World's Fair, the theories of social evolution, social Darwinism, and so forth. And so these scholars have characterized modernity, this late modernity, as being a period of science and technological innovation, of industrialization and related notions of progress, that we're getting smarter, we're getting better, we're getting more efficient, we're getting kinder, we're getting more understanding of the way the world works. There's progress. It's also characterized by individualism. So in the late modern period, for the first time, people in industrialized scientific societies began to think of themselves as individuals more than they thought of themselves as members of families, members of communities, members of religious groups. So we see people moving away from their families, following work, setting up new families in other cities, mobility, individualism, which for many was a mark of progress. And then finally, when it comes to intellectual pursuits, the modern period believed that there was truth with a capital T in the world, that we could discern through scientific inquiry, that we could understand in an objective fashion, that we could apply to other cases, so that we could, through the pursuit of knowledge, come to understand some actual true things about the way the world works, the way human society works, and use that to improve and further progress. Okay, so modernity, it was hopeful. It saw that things were getting better, that we were reaching truth, that there was truth, and so forth. And then what happened? The mid-20th century, well, early to mid-20th century, you have World War I, the war to end all worlds, the war to end all wars. And then you have World War II, the Holocaust. You have the vast destruction of people by Stalin. You have totalitarianism, death. You start to see all of these sort of dreams of progress fall away in these societies that had proclaimed them to be their hallmark. So post-modernity, this period, is characterized by failed ideologies and reversals of progress. Industrialization and progress, science and technological innovation become consumerism. I mean, people aren't interested in advancing scientific knowledge for the sake of scientific knowledge. They just want better products that they can buy to make their lives easier. I read something recently about how when people are polled about what are the greatest scientific achievements of the last 200 years, they don't really talk about science. They talk about consumer goods. So they don't say germ theory or nuclear fission. They say computers, cell phones, things like that. So all of this scientific progress really was about consumerism. In the modern period, individualism. People are being freed from the bonds of their families and communities to pursue their individual truth and progress. From the postmodern perspective, that individualism just resulted in social distance. Now we have loneliness, depression, suicide, suicide off the charts in groups of people who are benefiting from all this progress and industrialization and truth and so forth. So, we start to see the failure of families, the mental health issues among young people, all of this social distance because maybe we became too individualistic. And then finally, postmodernity is characterized by a disbelief in truth with a capital T. So now you see this in academia. It's more important to think about perspective. There's no one truth. Instead, there are lots of truths depending on your class identity, your ethnic identity, whether you're from the colonizer or the colonized society. Gender, sexuality, all these other kinds of perspectives and representations will affect what the quote-unquote truth is, according to postmodernity. So, things have gone very far in academia, and now we're starting to see kind of a backlash from people who say, well, everything might not be true, but maybe there is some truth, and maybe there are reversals of progress, but maybe the general trend is toward progress. So there's a lot of debate about this right now, but postmodernity has really hung on in fields such as cultural anthropology.